spent years running away from routines because I thought that I was too much of a free spirit and routines felt like a cage. But the truth is, routines, when they're intentional and when they are well crafted, they can be liberating and empowering. You're listening to the Life Edit Project podcast, where busy, ambitious high achievers get the tools they need to fight perfectionism and overwhelm so they can smash their goals without all the drama. I'm your host, recovering overachiever turned professional life coach, Elizabeth Burrows. Let's get to it. Good day, good people. Welcome back to episode 46 of the Life Edit Project podcast. As always, I'm your host, Coach Elizabeth, and I'm super glad you made it here to my little corner of the interwebs. I've got another enlightening episode for you today. We're wrapping up our 4-part productivity mini-series, and as a quick recap, we started this series with some tips on how to overcome procrastination, because if you're going to talk productivity, you have to start there. And then we followed that up with a roundup of some of the best productivity hacks to help you get more things done. Last week, we discussed how to guard against distractions, which are actually a huge productivity killer for so many of us. And today, we're going to land the plane on this mini-series with a conversation that will help you supercharge your productivity and take your performance to the next level in any area of your life. What the heck is this episode about? Well, we're talking about routines. And yes, I know it sounds super boring and kind of played out, but come on, you know me better than that. I wouldn't do you like that. So yeah, sure, we're talking about routines, but that doesn't mean that it's going to be a predictable conversation. We're going to jazz it up a bit and dive into the 3 different kinds of routines that you need in your life to be your most productive self. But before we dig in, I first want to thank you for rocking with me throughout this productivity mini-series. I have really enjoyed these conversations. I've enjoyed making these episodes. And if you have loved this series as much as I have, I would love it if you would consider leaving me a 5-star rating and review on Apple Podcasts. Leaving reviews are a great way to help other listeners find the show. And let's be real, I'm trying to get this show into the ears of as many people as possible. You can get step-by-step instructions on how to leave a review on my website. Just go to lifeeditproject.com/podcast for step-by-step instructions, including visuals, so that there's no confusion and no hesitation. It only takes 2 minutes, and for those 2 minutes, you will earn my undying gratitude and a future shout out on an episode. So go ahead and do your thing. Okay, now that I've got that plug out of the way, let's get this party started and talk routines, shall we? Let's go. So before we dive into the 3 types of routines that you can add to your life to be more productive, let's first back it up and make sure that we're on the same page. What the heck is a routine in the first place? Well, that very much depends on who you're asking. If you would have asked me from 10 years ago, I would have said that routines are a great way to just smother all the fun out of life and stifle creativity. I mean, I spent years running away from routines because I thought that I was too much of a free spirit and routines felt like a cage. But the truth is, routines, when they're intentional and when they are well crafted, they can be liberating and empowering. And here's why. A routine at its heart is just a series of recurring decisions that you make in advance. And making good decisions ahead of time on a regular basis will make you more productive, because decision fatigue is a real thing. It's real, y'all. And being productive is a decision that you have to make. Being productive is hard because you have to decide to do it. You have to decide to expend energy when you'd rather conserve it. And you have to decide to focus on the task at hand when it would be so easy to just follow your stream of consciousness and hop from thought to thought. And when decision fatigue kicks in, when you've reached the ceiling on how many good decisions you can make in a day, your brain just starts giving into impulses and resorting to the path of least resistance. But if you can decide to do something in advance, you get the benefit of being productive on purpose without making withdrawals from your daily decision bank. And this is really good news, because if you look around at your life, you will notice that a lot of decisions you're faced with are decisions you've already had to make at some point. And if you keep watching, many of those same decisions will come around again and again. So, what if you could find the recurring decisions in your life, the ones that might mean a big fumble if you wait to decide them in real time? What if you could find those decisions and just decide them, at least partially, in advance? There are 3 areas of your life, 3 types of routines that you can implement in your life that will help you be more productive. And when I say be more productive, I mean implementing these types of routines will help you get more done more consistently and create more of the results that you want out of your life. So, what are the 3 types of routines? I'm going to introduce them to you one by one. First up is standard routines. Now, if you're taking notes, this is definitely where you start writing things down. Standard routines are your basic routines that are part of your typical everyday life. They help you move through the present moment more efficiently. And this applies to daily routines and weekly routines, those really, really common, really habitual routines. And standard routines is probably what comes to mind when you think about routines, right? Morning routines, bedtime routines, weekend routines, right? These kinds of routines, these standard routines, create a rhythm in our daily lives. And on the one hand, the rhythm of these standard routines helps us feel in control. We feel like we know what to expect when we act out these kinds of standard routines. So, for example, I know how long it'll take me to get my daughter to school if I leave the house at a specific time and I drive a specific way. Or I know that my kid will fall asleep faster and stay asleep longer and wake up less cranky if I get her to bed at this specific time and we've done these specific things before she gets in bed, right? Those are standard routines. If there is a certain part of your day or even a certain day of your week that feels predictably chaotic, there's probably some kind of routine, some series of recurring decisions that you can make in advance that will cut down on the chaos that you experience. So look for opportunities to create more standard routines in your life, and your productivity will thank you. Next up are seasonal routines. Now, seasonal routines aren't as regular as standard routines, but they are recurring. They're the kind of routine that you turn to in a specific situation or in a specific season, hence seasonal routines. So an example might be spring cleaning. So let's say for you, spring cleaning is you deep clean your home and you purge all the closets, right? If you decide in advance that that's what you're going to do every spring, your spring cleaning is a seasonal routine because you do it every time the spring season comes up. For me, a seasonal routine that I have is Christmas shopping. So with Christmas shopping, I decide in advance who I'm shopping for, what my spending limit is, what kinds of gifts I want to get for everyone, and even where I will do my shopping. Now, don't sleep on the seasonal routines. It's so easy to overlook these kinds of routines because you don't need them every day. But seasons are cyclical. They just keep coming back around. And if the decisions that come with these seasons also keep coming back around, that means you can anticipate them. And if you can anticipate them, you can start making at least some of those decisions in advance. And making these decisions in advance is automatically going to make you more productive. For example, me and my Christmas shopping seasonal routine. I know that I get my Christmas shopping done way faster, and I end up with better gifts, and I end up staying within my budget when I'm not trying to decide who I can give this novelty wireless speaker to just because I happen to be in the store and I see it on sale, right? When I'm not trying to make that decision in the moment, I can be more productive. So the same principle applies to you as well. There is absolutely something that you're doing the hard way over and over again, year after year, simply because you're trying to avoid the decision. But leaning into the decision on purpose before it's time to make the decision, before that moment arrives, is actually the key to making that decision easier and more effective. So add some seasonal routines to your life. And then finally, there are what I've decided to call survival routines. As the name suggests, these are not your normal routines. Survival routines are not about maximizing productivity on a regular day or in a regular season. Rather, they are about maintaining a baseline in your life so that you can do what needs to be done, even in the face of major challenges and major life shifts. So, standard routines and seasonal routines are about freeing up mental bandwidth so that you can give your energy to the things that actually need your attention in the moment, to the things that you can't decide in advance. But survival routines are about constraining yourself to only those things that are absolutely necessary, especially when energy and focus is hard to come by. Because let's face it, if you're spending all your mental and emotional resources just trying to face the day, trying to show up the same way you would when you feel like Superwoman is the opposite of being productive. That's just the fast track to burnout. So, what's an example of a time when you might need a survival routine? Let me give you a really personal example from my own life. So, many years ago, my dad got very ill, and it took the doctors almost a year before they figured out what was wrong. Eventually, he was diagnosed with a very rare autoimmune disorder, and they finally were able to get him the treatment that he needed. But in those 6 months leading up to his diagnosis, and even in that first year after his diagnosis, those times were extremely rough. Like, it was so hard. We rushed my dad to the ER so many times, and there were just so many times when the doctors weren't even sure that he was going to make it. Now, he did. My dad is still with us to this day, which is great. But during that time, my whole family adopted essentially what was a survival routine so that we could just get through that tough season. So for us, that looked like making decisions in advance about who was going to handle phone calls, right? So if my dad suddenly went into the hospital, we had this whole procedure for who we were going to notify and when, and who was going to make those calls. And when people would start calling to check on my dad and to see how he was doing, who was going to answer those calls, who was going to return calls, who was going to send the text messages, right? So we made decisions in advance about how to communicate with people. And we made decisions in advance about who was going to talk to the doctors and who was going to keep track of medication and how those things would happen. And we decided in advance when it was going to be important to have all of us and all hands on deck at the hospital versus when it was okay for us to just take shifts and have one person there at a time. During this time, my mom was also, she was like at the height of her career, and she was leading a team of over 50 people. At some point during this process, she decided in advance what level of engagement and contact she needed to maintain with her job when my dad was in the hospital. And she would decide in advance what kinds of work activities she could just completely opt out of. Right? So that's an example of a time that my family adopted a survival routine. Now, a less extreme example, and probably one that you can relate to, is let's say you have a teething baby. Now, if you have ever lived with a baby, you know that sometimes routines are your friend, and other times the routine doesn't work at all, and the only goal you have is to just survive the madness, survive the chaos. So if your baby is suddenly teething, it doesn't matter that they used to sleep 5 hours at a time uninterrupted. If they're teething, now they wake up every other hour and they're fussy and they bite your face every time you snuggle in close for a kiss, right? It's not normal. So during a time like this, if you have a teething baby, your standard overnight routine, it goes down the drain when the teething starts. And that's fine. Just don't hold yourself to standard expectations, right? If your baby is waking up every other hour, expecting yourself to get 5 hours of uninterrupted sleep is a setup. That's not real life. You have to honor the season that you're in if you're going to survive it. Okay, so those are the 3 kinds of routines that you can add to your life that will make you more productive. Standard routines will help you move through everyday life more efficiently. Seasonal routines will help you make better decisions when you can anticipate them. And survival routines are for those times when life is lifing and the other routines are totally impractical. So this week, your homework is to pick one area of your life that feels chaotic and unproductive and make some decisions in advance. Decide how you want to navigate that part of life and how you can navigate it better by implementing one of these kinds of routines. And of course, as always, if you need help crafting routines that make sense for your life and sticking to them, I can help with my private one-on-one life coaching services. Just tap the link that's in the show notes to book a sales call with me, and we can get started. And together, we will supercharge your productivity. In the meantime, I will be back in your ears next week with another fresh, juicy episode. I'll talk to you then. All right? Peace. Hey, thanks for tuning into this week's episode. If you have a question or a favorite insight from today's conversation, I would love to hear from you. Send me a message on social media. I'm in all the places. My handle is @LifeEditProject, all one word. And of course, my accounts are linked up in the show notes to make it easy for you. So holla at your girl. I'll be back in your ears next week with a fresh episode. Make sure that you are subscribed to the Life Edit Project podcast wherever you like to listen so that you don't miss a thing. Until then, peace.